So thank you so much, Briana Marela, for joining me today. This is the If Ever You're Listening podcast. I'm your host and editor of the If Ever You're Listening Substack, Stanley Clark. And today we have a very special guest. And before we get into any of our questions, I'd love to introduce Briana so the listeners have more information about who she is before we go into her amazing career and all the twists and turns and kind of interesting bits and pieces of what she does and what she continues to do in the music space. So Briana is a Peruvian American composer, vocalist, engineer, producer, performing artist. She's toured across the United States and Europe and Mexico and Canada. And some notable people that she's toured with are Waxahatchee, Emel Mathlouthi, and Jenny Hval. Additionally, she's collaborated with NPR's Radiolab to make a song about the Fourth Amendment, which I'll share in the description of this piece. It's a really cool piece. I like to think of her, the more I learn more about her music and her careers, she's really a visionary when it comes to like the deconstruction of music. And so what I mean by that is she deconstructs pop music, but also music in general and sound down to its bare bones and kind of all the way to the instruments that we use to record music. And more of that will make sense when we talk more about, I think, her work. I think her entire career, but her work, especially after her master's. She's an award recipient. She's received many awards. Two of her awards of note are the Allied Arts Foundation grant, as well as the American Association of University Women's Career Development Grant. Briana's received the Bachelor's of Art at Evergreen State College and also has a Master's in Fine Arts from Mills College in Oakland, California. But welcome, Briana. How's it going?
Thanks, Stanley. It's great to talk to you. Thanks for wanting to dive deep into what I do.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, so some background on how I learned about Briana's music. I started in the middle, I would say at 2017 with Call It Love and kind of went backwards from there. And since then, I've been trying to keep up as much as I can. But for this interview, I did a lot more integrating into the nuances of kind of even her early work. And so we're going to start from the
Wow.
beginning and bring us to the present. So I went as far back as 2007, but take us back even more to how it was growing up in Seattle. What kind of kid were you? And when did your love for music start?
Oh, that's a sweet question. Well, I think I was always very drawn to music as a kid. Just would like be kind of impulsively just dancing whenever music would come on. And, my parents thought it was really cute and just always was trying to sing. And my mom put me in this children's performing group because she saw I was just obsessed with singing and performing, even though I was a really shy kid. Like I was, yeah, probably like, I don't know what is the right adjective to use, but painfully shy, maybe, kind of throughout, yeah, K through 12. And it took a lot to battle that super shy, scared kind of persona with this other alter ego of mine that like really just wanted to perform and be in the spotlight too.
Fascinating. Okay, so we have a very shy Briana growing up in Seattle, but she loves music. And so before you started making your own music, who were you listening to? Who were some of your early music inspirations?
Um, I guess that's a good question. I mean, before I was making music, I only really started composing or like writing songs in middle school and high school. And before then, it was a lot of like, I don't know, I feel like mainstays of like American pop music or like, obviously early influences like the Beatles and Beach Boys and stuff that you're like given to listen to as a kid and you're just like, this is fun. And
Mhm.
um, but yeah, I think it wasn't until later in high school that I started like going deeper into music and kind of finding artists that I resonated with. And definitely a big inspiration for me has always been Bjork. kind of like
Hmm.
since my teens.
Yep. I definitely hear Bjork. Um, and okay, so when did you start learning music instruments, or did you record kind of voice before you started learning instruments? How did that order of things kind of come about in middle school or high school?
Um, I I think I've always been bad at playing musical instruments, and I've wanted to try to have more access to playing musical instruments, but I think I like missed a point when I was young and maybe even just lacked sort of the dedication to get really proficient at an instrument, or just I don't know, something about it. It never really happened, and I relate a lot more to artists who have found their instrument like through like the computer, or like through like sampling and like that kind of thing of like using machines as instruments. And once I realized that, oh, I don't have to be really good at guitar, or I don't have to be really good at playing the piano, like, oh, I can make songs in this other way, that just felt I connected more to that of like making music on the computer and through sampling and through processing my voice and like capturing my voice. And but oops, I don't know if I answered that question completely, but
It did. No, it's a lead up to the next question, which is 2007. We have a project, Stuck in a Rhythm. Um,
Hmm.
I believe your first project, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that you've released. And it sounded like it was music that you made and wrote when you were 15, 16. And you worked with a mentor of yours, Joanna Cunin, who was helpful in that process. So could you talk a little bit about Joanna's influence, as well as kind of how you look back at that early project?
Yeah, that was really special. I mean, I think growing up in the Northwest in high school, I got pretty inundated with like Northwest indie rock, which is just it was like a scene, you know, it was pretty twee. And I think some of my kind of earlier songs and compositions are just, yeah, in that kind of genre. And I wanted to I had these songs I was writing, and I wanted to record them. And Johanna knew she was like 10 years older than me, and so she felt like this bigger sister, older sister that I never had. And she was really sweet and very helpful in connecting me to some friends of hers who helped record me and those songs. And there's this thing, I don't know if they still do it in Washington, but it's called a like a senior project. So when
Mhm.
you're a senior in high school, you had a some big project that you had to do, and it could be anything you wanted. Um, and so I decided to record an EP, and it was just those four songs.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, it's a great EP. If anybody has not heard it, I did listen to it, and it surprisingly reminded me a lot of the stuff you made with Jack Jaguar.
Hmm,
More
interesting.
like mainstream pop-ish type of music, but of course, it still had your unique take on it, which we'll get into, which I think fills out the rest of your discography. Okay, so in addition to the 2007 project, you released additional projects early in your career, Water, Ocean, Lake, and Speak from Your Heart. So
Hmm.
talk about kind of what motivated you to start releasing music now. Um, Out, I believe these are post high school, and where were you in your life at those moments?
I was in Olympia, Washington, where I went to the Evergreen State College, and I had been learning about audio production and music technology. And I think that was when I had the epiphany of, oh, I don't have to be good at playing an instrument. Like my voice is my instrument, and these machines are my instruments. And yeah, Water Ocean Lake is a lot of little songs and pieces that I recorded during probably mostly my like junior year of Evergreen. And yeah, it was just me exploring and trying things out. And it was, yeah, it's hard to describe, but yeah, it was also kind of crossed over with like my first big breakup, and also just like the feeling of getting older, and it was like approaching that end of school, and it's like, what am I going to do next? So I feel like there's a lot of just kind of captured some playfulness and curiosity, but then also there's some like sadder undertones of just like growing up and the loss of like a first big relationship.
Mm.
And then that kind of continued on into Speak From Your Heart. So I put that out after I finished college, and I recorded it mostly at this studio in Olympia that was like the K record studio called Dub Narcotic with this guy named Bob Schwenkler. And so that he was like so important in helping that record get done. We just like we spent like a whole year just like off and on. We like meet up every month and work on it because he was working and I was working and doing school. And yeah, so that also kind of continued like a breakup theme, but then also just, I guess, trying to do a little bit of like self introspection.
Mm. Understood. Fantastic. And so that's actually the project after Call It Love. I listened back to Speak From Your Heart. And that's when I was like, all right, I like her. She's not just, it's not, I don't just love this album, I like her as an artist. So just
Oh,
for
that's so
fans,
sweet.
for people who are listening, that I would highly recommend that project. All of the projects are really good, but that one is especially the special one. For after Speak From Your Heart, we start to see you thereafter releasing music with Jack Jaguar. So how did that relationship begin? And kind of take us through those years and how you look back on it.
Mhm.
And we'll pause there.
Okay. Yeah, so after Speak From Your Heart, I had gone, or when I put out that album, I kind of enlisted my sibling, Asenath, to do a full US tour with me. It's so funny because I'm coming from this like very shy persona that I've slowly and slowly tried to break out of. You know, it still kind of comes back, like I'll settle into it again, but I don't think I'm as shy as I used to be. But I was like, I want to go on a tour of the whole US. I want to go through the South. I've never been through there. I want to go to the East Coast. I've never been to anywhere on the East Coast. Like I just hadn't been anywhere in the US, and I wanted to go play a bunch of shows and play my music and, you know, sell records and meet people. And yeah, I was like 21. So it felt like a very ripe time to be like, I'm going to put myself out there. And my sibling's 2 years younger than me. And I think I actually, I don't know if I should admit this, but I actually had got another driver's license. And so I gave that to them because we had to play some shows in bars. And also we ended up, people would be hanging out after the show and they'd want to go to a bar, but Aseneth wasn't 21 yet. So we had to like figure out how to get them in, which was kind of a funny adventure sometimes. But yeah, we went around the whole country, and then it was in Providence, Rhode Island, that we played a show, and this guy was really sweet named Scott Alario, and he had bought I think a CD or a tape from me, and he had showed it to his friend Alex Summers, who was the person who produced All Around Us, which is my first album that came out on Jag Jaguar.
Mm. Okay, very
So it
cool.
was kind of through that tour that I ended up making that connection to the person who ended up being a really good friend that recorded that album.
That's incredible that you made that tour, a self funded tour, I assume.
It was very DIY. Yeah,
Yeah.
I booked it through friends of friends, and you know, we were just like sleeping sometimes in the car. That was like the hardest thing. It's just we were traveling in like a Hyundai Sonata, and we were just like we didn't have somewhere to stay. We just like tried to find a good neighborhood to park and like slept in the front seats.
Love that. I love that. That's a true DIY
Yeah.
grind. Fantastic. So that opens up this opportunity um, to meet somebody who connects you to Jack Jaguar. And so through Jack Jaguar, we get two projects All Around Us and Call It Love. Um, Kind of how do you look back at those projects, and how do you think about kind of how you and Jack Jaguar had to part ways after Call It Love?
Um, I think with some time away from being dropped by them, I think what I'm left with is just a feeling of gratitude. Like I feel super grateful that they took a chance on my music. And, you know, I don't think what I'm doing is necessarily super commercially like reachable. Like I'm not like a Taylor Swift or something, you know, like I'm not I'm trying, like you said, I'm trying to make something that's not exactly pop music, but it's like taking these elements of pop music that I love. And so, yeah, I think those, both of those albums are very pop, you know, they have a lot of fun melodies and production ideas that I feel like were really drawn from the pop world. But yeah, I think it's just hard to make money as a musician, and Jaguar is a big record label. Like they're essentially, I think I didn't appreciate at the time when I was younger too, that they're kind of like a major label, like except just in the indie world.
Hmm.
And it's kind of insane that they even put out my records at all. And but yeah, I feel really grateful that they took a chance, and I learned so much. I got the opportunity to tour with these amazing artists that I might not have had. And yeah, I just feel really grateful for that time of my life. And it's such a highlight of just like my 20s and yeah, and also just kind of a glimpse into the music industry world, which is, you know, not what I thought it was all the time. And I think, yeah, I just learned a lot about how I don't necessarily want to be like doing what you kind of have to do to like be super successful in the music industry. And not to say I wouldn't work with another label or I wouldn't put out more music in that capacity, but I think I've just learned a lot of lessons and like learned how I would do it better the next time if I ever had that opportunity, or how I'm also not the most eager to like jump back into that because it's intense and there's a lot of pressure put on you to make money. I think at a time too, I would like see photos of myself or video or like videos of me performing and feel like really bad about my appearance and things like that. And yeah, there's just things that feel harder feeling in the spotlight. And I think being a shy person, I'm I battle, yeah, with that wanting to be seen and not seen. So
Well, you took that opportunity after Jaguar. I always say part ways, but you said drop, so we'll use the term dropped. I just feel like it's more polite, but I
no,
love
you're right. We did part ways.
you did part ways because you could have went like, I'm not leaving. No, I'm kidding. But what I admire about your career at this point is that you're not like knocking at all these other indie record label stores and trying to join a competitor and label and do the exact same thing. You take a complete left turn and you go into academia and you
Mhm.
continue your education. So at this point, I lost my mouse. There's my mouse. Um, you go to Mills College. You leave Washington and you go to a whole different state in California, and you don't do it is still related to music, but it is education and academia, um,
Mhm.
and you focus there. And so, tell me about why you went into education again, and what did you want to get out of the program?
Mm, that's a really great question.
Thank you.
So, so I think after my experience in the music industry, I realized that I think I was becoming too obsessed with this idea of, well, how could I make music that people will like or that could sell because of this like feeling of pressure from the label. And I think it was not like all pressure direct from them. It was kind of an internal pressure of like, I want to be like successful monetarily, you know, so I want to figure out making pop music that maybe people will like and could be like in a commercial or something, which is a silly reason to be making music, honestly. And so I think I realized the way to shift my focus of like trying to make music that I thought people would like, that I also liked,
Mhm.
was that I want to just make music for me and just like make something that feels like the purest expression of my heart and myself. And it's not for anyone else, and it's for me. And also just pushing myself to learn and go deeper with, like, I've used this program called Max, like Max MSP for many years, but during some of my JAG time, I dropped it and was just using Ableton and using it in a little more like just the way people use Ableton in pop performance. But Max is just it's a visual coding language, and it's like you build something from scratch and you're building like a little, it's almost like neural network or something. Like you're just like building little pieces and you're like connecting them together, and you can just, yeah, get really creative and free, and nothing is on the grid. So everything's sort of out of time. And yeah, I wanted to learn more about that program. And so I knew that at Mills, they focused on that. That's like a big performance tool for a lot of Mills people. And yeah, I also just thought it would push me to be around other artists and musicians who wanted to focus on pushing themselves and really experiment. Like I think I didn't truly understand what the word experimental or experiment meant in terms of music until going to Mills and really seeing how people push conceptually what a composition is or what music is to them or what a piece is. And I mean, I don't think I'm the most highly conceptual, but it definitely influenced my work, and especially my work with my professor, Letitia Tsunami.
Fantastic. Well, speaking of concepts, I think what you do near the end of your program, your thesis, is an amazing concept project.
Mm.
And so I did watch that. I did do my best to conceptualize it, but I was writing it, I was like, I'm just gonna ask her how she interprets it, because I would need to do more research on like exactly what you were doing. But I thought it was phenomenal. So
Oh, thank you so much.
no problem. Describe to people, I wrote, it was extraordinary. I'm like reading my notes. Describe to people, how would you describe your thesis to somebody who has not listened to it yet? And I'll put a link in the description, but also there were some personal elements to it. So you could talk a
Mm.
little bit about kind of what you wanted the listener to get out of it, and kind of through the process, what you got out of creating it.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. So my initial concept for a lot of my newer performances and like the performances that are in that thesis, um, I wanted to figure out how to perform live without playing traditional instruments.
Mhm.
And in that way, I was drawn to using objects as a way to visually engage an audience. And like, I'm like, how can I turn like this metal bowl into an instrument that's not just a metal bowl? Or how can I use my body and my hands to move sound? Or like, how can I become an instrument? Or how can these objects become instruments? Or how can I send my voice out? Like the third piece of the thesis, I'm actually, instead of sending my voice out, all the sounds from that piece aren't being sent out through the PA. They're going, I have 5 different cymbals around the concert hall, and the sound is coming out of each of the cymbals because I have these like surface transducers. I could show you one. Like I have one here. It looks like this. When I'm holding up what looks like a speaker coil, because it's essentially what would be in a speaker except without the cone.
Mhm.
And this thing, like, it moves. So the sound would, when you attach it to an object that is resonant, like like cymbal or like a metal piece of something, it'll send the sound out through that. So you hear the metal is pushing the sound out.
Mm.
And yeah, it sounds really beautiful and haunting. And it was like a fun way to play with the space too, and like have the cymbals all around the concert hall. And yeah, a lot of my grad school time I was in like I'm still in like a 7-year relationship, and I used to write a lot of love songs, like breakup songs and processing that. But then after being in a stable relationship for a long time, I realized that my shift in my songwriting has, for lyrics at least, has really gone to more of like a self-reflective, introspective place, and realizing that as much as I was writing like love songs, and probably still will from now and then, or like I write love songs about friends too, but that I would like to try to figure out how to love myself more. And I think that was a big struggle in grad school, as I realized I have so much love for other people, but I do not love myself. I like almost hated myself. Like there were moments that felt so intense to realize how much I belittle myself or have these expectations and tear myself down. And so I think a lot of the pieces, at least the very first piece of the thesis, is about trying to reconcile with how I'll never be what my expectation is and how I have to try to just accept who I am and like this is what I have to offer and to give to you, and I just have to share that.
That's so beautiful. And it sounds as beautiful as she's describing it. So in addition to there's bowls, she's moving her hands, she's moving the sound of what we're hearing with her body. There's a surround sound through what she showed us, and she's wearing a bodysuit. So describe because I believe the bodysuit you're wearing is custom and it's also a part of the performance as well.
It is, yeah. It basically is just there's two accelerometers, which just helps you tell where something is in space, like X, Y, and then Z. So there, it gives my computer the data to know where my hands are in space. And then other than that, the bodysuit had a bunch of toggles so that I could essentially turn things on and off or like tell the system to like move to a next part or to play this sound next. And I wanted to be able to do that without having to touch any like MIDI controllers. And so I kind of became, my body was the MIDI controller and then my hands were the parameter. Like basically, like if you're thinking about using a computer, it was like my hands become like the mouse and the toggles ended up becoming like clicks, you know. That's maybe a simple way to describe it.
Yeah,
but actually, I recently rebuilt that bodysuit because it was, well, I simplified it a lot. I decided to just keep the two accelerometers because the whole bodysuit felt a little cumbersome and it was kind of susceptible to breaking. I do want to figure out a way to have toggles again, but show you. I made this new kind of like sleeve thing. It's like a mesh sleeve thing. Actually, it's like something that I think is like bigger in like maybe the rave community. It's like these mesh sleeves, but then I realized it was the perfect thing to mount my accelerometers on. And so the accelerometer is on the wrist, and then I have a wire that I put these grommets and it comes up and sorry, it's silly to try to put something on while
No,
I'm talking
great.
to you.
This is great. This is exactly what this is what I wanted to see.
And then yeah, so I just made this recently after a long time of oops, I'm always handling it. And yeah, it allows me to be able to control where the sound is in space using my two hands as reference points and yeah.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Okay. So again, definitely watch that thesis statement. I like to think of it almost as another project. Like I because it's over 25 minutes, I believe. So it's a good amount or an EP, but it's a good display of another chapter in Brianna's music that just proves how good she is.
No, thanks. That's so sweet.
No problem. The next section I have is the projects that you released after. I don't know if they were after your MFA, but I put after, definitely after JAG. And I guess you could describe kind of where exactly you were, but the first one is You Are a Wave, released in 2022. And then there's a collab album. But first, I want to talk about You Are a Wave because it's connected to a tragedy that happened in your life, the passing of your father. So, of course, talk about it as much as you would like, but kind of talk about the motivation for that project, as well as the new way you were approaching music at the time, because this project, that's the first one, technically the first project since Call It Love. And the difference is huge. So, but so much has happened in the middle, and that's why I'm glad I got to interview you because we got to really discuss what happened in the middle and where you're at at that point. So yeah, kind of talk a little bit more about You Are a Wave.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's funny that today is Father's Day
I know.
and
Yeah.
we're talking about, yeah, and it's also just, I mean, wild that it's been 4 years. I was saying that to someone at work the other day, and I was like, oh yeah, it's been 4 years since my father passed away, like last month. And they were like, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. And I realized it was the first time that I could say that without bursting into tears. And I
Mm.
was like, oh, it took 4 years to not just cry, like thinking about him. But I think if I'm like on my hormonal cycle or like on my period, I will just still burst into tears. But but yeah, it's yeah, it's very strange the way time heals grief. And I miss my dad every day. I think about him all the time, and he's such a part of who I am. And he's in my heart and he's a part of me. But yeah, it's you have to move on and you have to keep living your life. And I know that's what he would want me to be doing. And he was such a big supporter of my music. And I think I would be letting him down if I just like gave up and stopped trying to do what I'm doing. And so yeah, and I think I technically have an album that I'm gonna put out myself, I think, this fall. That's sort of the in-between album, actually, between Call It Love and You Are a Wave.
Ooh.
But it kind of got shelved because of grief and grad school. And it's been done for a while, actually, but I decided it just felt wrong to put that album out first. And
Mm.
I had this other album that I'd been working on in school, and then these songs that came, like a few songs on the album of You Are a Wave, the title track and the song Uncertainty in the Unknown are specifically about the loss of my dad and processing his loss. And it felt wrong to put out this older album first
Mhm.
without putting out these songs that I had written for my dad. And I wanted those to be out in the world first because it felt more pressing and acknowledging his importance and acknowledging that loss rather than just being like, here's this pop album I made with my partner that's like about us falling in love basically. But
That's
like
very
that, but it just felt wrong. It was like I can't put that album out yet. And yeah, and then I think at the same time it's harder to put something out from the past now that I'm moving in a different direction and maybe not doing exactly those kind of things. But I do have a lot of music from the past too that's never come out.
Mm.
So I might also eventually put out older stuff too. It's hard to just be sitting on a lot of music. And I'd actually showed this album that's going to come out in the fall. It's called Teardrop Star.
Very cool. Exclusive.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, I don't think I haven't talked about it at all, but I sent it to a friend who had seen me perform a lot of the songs because I had played a lot of them live, but the recordings never came out.
Mm.
And she's like, people are going to be like, why have you been sitting on this for years? How could you? And I thought that was sweet of her.
So now I'm super excited. I'm gonna try to contain my professionalism, but phenomenal. I have so many questions now about that. If it's between Call It Love, I'm just gonna ask one of them.
Hmm.
And You Are a Wave, does it sound like a mixture of the two, or where were you kind of musically? And it's with your partner, so um,
Mm-hmm. I was with my bandmate. So I fell in love with my friend who so my friend Joel and I have known each other since we were 18.
mhm.
And like we've like dated a bunch of each other's friends. Like we kind of were like just friends for like a long time. And then like Joel played in my band. He was playing drums with me and also like making other wacky sounds with samplers and stuff. And then yeah, it was like in very late 2017, 2018 that we decided like, oh, actually we're in love. It just sounds really cheesy. But and then so this album was made in 2018, 2019, and it was like kind of made when I was getting dropped by Jag and then right when I was deciding that I wanted to go to Mills. So it was almost like this last like I'm making these pop songs, but Joel plays on like almost all the songs, which is different because he's never played on Joel's played on at least like one song per album. just because he's been a music collaborator for so long. But on this album, he plays on every song. And so I feel like his imprint is really on it. And there's a lot of strange sounds because he loves making like weird ambient sounds. And another friend who has listened to the album is like, this is your album of weird sounds. It's like kind of like I call it maybe like a hazy ambient pop album. There's
Okay.
still some really strong melodies and like fun pop songs, but there's also just like some stranger atmospheric world. It's like not quite as like slick or produced as like Call It Love and All Around Us. It's a little more lo-fi too.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, because I was about to say All Around Us is pretty dreamy. It's
Mm,
pretty it could be described as hazy. I've seen a lot of people describe it as dreamy.
mm.
But that's the project I was listening to today to prep, like to get myself in the mood.
Oh,
Like, oh man, that's some good stuff. So the title track specifically, I was playing that a lot today. The
oh.
That's phenomenal. Okay, so I'm gonna try to stay on topics, to stay in chronological order, but that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So after You Are a Wave, within the same year, actually, I don't know if they were recorded around the same time, but you have a collab album that's released the same
Mm,
year with Sally Decker called Small Tremble in Slow Motion. And this is another, I would say, experimental project, but not in the same way You Are a Wave is experimental. This is more like a meditation album.
mm,
It's still, I feel it's a bit story based. It's almost ASMR, but not really ASMR, more like a meditation, guided meditation
mm.
in a very cool, unique way. So kind of talk more about how did you even, was that Sally's idea? Was it your idea? How did you guys unite and kind of how do you look back at that project as well?
Oh, that was a really fun album to make. And it came at a really crucial point in time for me too. Um, I was briefly living in New York for 8 months with Joel, and we we just had moved there because some friends had a really cheap room opening up. We moved there in August of 2020, which is like a really whack time to move anywhere. Um, but we moved there and we got jobs and we're just hanging out and having fun, like exploring Brooklyn and yeah, just like trying to meet people, even though everyone's wearing masks and no one wants to let you into their house. You're like hanging out outside at like parks and bonfires and stuff. Um, but Sally had a artist residency that she was supposed to do in New York, but it got canceled the in-person part got canceled because of COVID. And they were telling her, oh, you can do it remote and we'll like send you the money and we'll like do like an online presentation of the work. And Sally and I went to Mills together and I performed on some pieces of hers. Like she's an amazing composer. And so I felt like we approached that album and project but she reached out to me because she was like, oh, I'm doing this remote residency, but decided part of like the residency was like being connected to people or like being in person. And so like it felt, I mean, I don't know if this is exactly how she felt, but I think it was more like, I want to bring a friend into this world. So I'm not doing it like in isolation because everything was feeling in isolation then. So she brought me in and yeah, we would meet. I think we spent like 6 months. We would just like have a weekly phone call for the first few months and we'd just talk about how we were feeling. And we had a journal like in a Google Doc that we would just write all these words, how we were feeling. And I was still really in the depths of my grief. And so I was writing all of these words and like poetry about my grief. And Sally had just gone out of a really important relationship for her. So she had a big breakup. And so we were both having our own kinds of loss and just thinking about how you feel loss in the body and how loss shapes your mind. And I think the album is really a focus on trying to be present with grief and be present with loss and not just push it away. And I think it was really helpful for my grieving process and to be able to, yeah, to speak out these anxieties and worries and the way I was feeling and in that time. And I think, yeah, we just both approached it from a kind of experimental lens, and we were just passing recordings back and forth from, I was in New York and she was still in Oakland. And I think maybe that's even part of why it feels, yeah, it just feels like this. We were almost like, there was a point where we almost felt like we were making a podcast. There's like,
Yeah, yeah, I can hear that. I can hear
but
that.
it's like musical theater podcast or something. But yeah, that was definitely an inspiration point too, or like a point of reference. And
Mm.
there was a visual component to that too. I don't know if you.
Yes, I did see that. I was outside when I was listening to it, and it was like out the videos are like outside. So I was just like,
Hmm.
I think I what they want me to do is like look outside. So I remember like looking outside, but
Mm.
there is a lot. If I was inside and I was watching it, I would have like been glued to like exactly what you guys were showing me. But there is this beautiful video that connected with the video, connected with the music. So I highly recommend that for myself and for anybody listening to go back and listen to that because it's really cool. How did you come up with the visuals for that? And was that made kind of in peace between the two of you, or did you guys come together to create the visuals?
The coolest thing about that was the residency had some funding,
Mhm.
and part of the funding, we we used basically all of the funding just to buy video cameras. Like neither of us had ever had our own video camera, and we were like, okay, we're gonna each buy the same camera so that it'll look the
Mm.
same for making the video. And we just recorded ourselves, and we also uploaded it into a folder. So there was just a lot of like, we were both working on it simultaneously but far away, and we'd put things into a folder and then we'd talk about what we liked and tried to piece it together. And yeah, it was a fun process. It felt like so deeply collaborative despite us being like so far away from each other. And it's interesting now because Sally and I are actually working on more music. For
Ooh.
we have a couple shows coming up, and we wanted to try to work on new music. And it's fun, but it's like it's definitely different being like, oh yeah, now we're in the same place and we can work on things in the same.
Exactly. Well, man, that's amazing. I live in New Jersey, so if there's any shows in like
Oh, cool.
New York, I'll try to come through. So that's really really cool. And I was looking through your website, fantastic website by the way, a lot because that's
Mm.
when I realized she's way more than just a pop, even like experimental artist. She's doing all these other things. And it broke down a few of your tours, and I saw one of them was in New York, I think like a couple of years ago. So I was like, ah, crap. But in the
Oh,
future, I said to myself, when I see her, I'm going to tell her, if you're in New York,
oh.
let me know, and I'll try to come through. Um, okay, fantastic. So those are the end of my questions related to your music as it currently exists. My next question, before I get into more fun questions, um, is what is your vision for the future, and how do you see your career progressing moving forward in this new direction? Do you want to continue to
Mm.
be um, an independent artist? Do you want to eventually go back to a label? Do you want to do more academia, PhDs? Like, where do you see yourself? I feel like your career, I can never kind of tell. It's excitingly, it's like a white sheet of paper. It's excitingly blank, because
Mm.
you could do so many things and really well in so many different departments. So it's
Oh, thank you. That's really sweet. I Yeah, I mean, I have this old album I want to put out, but I'm not going to tour it. And then I have another album that's basically done too, that's of all my Mills, like live performance pieces. So it's like includes the signal flow thesis pieces. So those have been like more nicely recorded, and um it'll be like a 9-track album of those pieces. And I want to do like a full tour to support that, because the pieces are really meant to be performed live, and they're meant to be in front of an audience, and they're so live. It's all voice and electronics, and a lot of the electronics are being triggered by the voice, and like I'm recording little samples of my voice live. And so I guess my biggest goal is to put that album out next year. I don't know if it'll be on a label or just myself. The Teardrop Star album, I will put out myself. Mostly just because, I don't know, it just feels harder to want to put something out on a label when I kind of know, like, I can just put this out myself and I don't necessarily need to make a bunch of new fans. Like, if people find my music, that's great. Like, I welcome them to get into what I'm doing, but I guess in putting things out on a bigger scale, it's like, what is my goal? Is it to just like make a bunch of fans and like be successful or something? Or is it just to put out music, especially even for like the people who already know and love my music, and I can do that myself, and then I own 100% of the music and I don't have to share that, and I can really have my own vision for the art, and not have to be influenced by like label people saying what they think the art should be, and yeah, I think in the meantime, I'm just going to try and be independent and DIY and stick to those roots. But, I'm always open to having some financial support, because doing things on your own takes so much longer. Like everything that I've been doing since JAG is just taken so long, because it's like, oh, I need to pay this person to do this, but I have to work this many hours at my job to be able to pay for it. And it just, yeah, it's harder when you don't have someone being like a bank giving you a loan, basically, which is essentially what labels do. It's like, here's some money to finish your project. But
Facts. That's a great way to look at it. Yeah. No more loans. We're doing it independent.
yeah.
That's exciting. No, I'm very excited. So yeah, if you ever need opinions on stuff, I'm here. And I when I say me, I also mean like people who love your music, because you said you would rather not have a label pick and choose, but you kind of have us to pick and choose from, the listeners, and we could help as well. But the two projects that you have coming, I'm excited for those two. Okay. So cool. Next, so I have a Substack, also called If Ever You're Listening. And on that, I call them more like Substack related questions, or
Mm.
and there's only four of them. So it's like four questions I ask anybody I interview, and everybody always gives such unique answers because they're open-ended. And um, I would love to hear these. I have no idea what you would say to any of these, because I don't know you personally. So first one is, what are you listening to these days? What is on your playlist?
Oh my gosh, that's always a hard question. I mean, this is kind of embarrassing, but I've definitely been listening to the new Charlie XCX album.
Yeah.
Brat.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't, my love for pop music runs true. I can't ever fully escape my love for pop music. Um, but yeah, I feel like lately, because of doing more like mixing and production work for people, for friends mostly, I feel like I've been listening a lot to friends' albums, and like my friend Michelle Moeller put out an album that I mixed for her, and I just, yeah, still just love that album so much. It's so beautiful. And some friends in Oakland named Mitch and Brendan put out an album under a band name called Risa, like Risa. I'm forgetting what the name of it is. I think it's just one, like Risa one.
Right. So one. Okay. Cool.
But yeah, I think that album is really, really beautiful, like instrumental work, like kind of like experimental synthesis, and
Mm,
yeah, some beautiful melodies, but lots of strange atmospheric sounds too.
awesome.
But let me think about if there's something else.
Yeah. Show some people out.
What else have I been listening to? Yeah, I just feel like I've been listening to people in the Bay too. Like I feel like I've just like playing shows with people. I just feel like I've been kind of immersed in like local music too. And I live at the place I live. I guess I shouldn't say where I live, but I live at a music, like a DIY music venue in Oakland.
Cool. Very
And
cool.
so we have shows, and like there's so many amazing people that come through and play here. So,
I love that. Okay. What happened? I froze. Okay. I have three more questions. What song of yours do you think is the most underrated or underappreciated, and why?
oh, that's a really good question.
Mhm.
Um, I think my song, a song from All Around Us called "I Don't Belong to You,"
Ooh,
I
yes.
think is very underrated. I think it's one of my favorite songs I've ever written, and
Great,
but
great, great track.
thank you. Yeah, I just feel like people aren't ready for it or something. I don't, even though it's been a long time, I just feel like that was a song that Jag had actually suggested maybe I cut from the album.
Really?
There was actually another song that was supposed to be on the album. I guess it was like 11 tracks, or I can't remember how many tracks are on it, but there was a song, it was longer, and they were like, you have to cut one song. The album's too long to be pressed to vinyl. And
Hmm.
they're like, we think you should cut I Don't Belong to You. And I was like, no. And then they're like, okay, what about Everything Is New? And I'm like, no,
Double no.
double no. And then we ended up cutting this song called Lonely Place.
Hmm. And that's still never been released before. It's still unreleased.
It came out on a lathe cut that this
Ah.
label Joyful Noise put out, but it's never been anywhere digital.
Hmm.
And actually, I'm gonna try to talk to Jag and see if maybe for the 10-year anniversary of All Around Us, if we could maybe just put out Lonely Place as like a belated single. It's not like a single kind of song.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be the last song on the album, so it's very much like a kind of just ambient swirl of a
Hmm.
song. But yeah, I don't belong to you. I love that song, but it's not for everyone.
It's not for everyone. I was listening to that one today, so I did hear that, and it was that and All Around Us, the track were two songs that I played a lot today, from
Oh.
Around Us. So that's insane that you said that. Um, I swear I'm not pulling your leg. Okay, awesome. I'll listen more to that project. Next question: if you could change anything about the music industry, what would it be and why?
Hmm. I mean, I think a big thing that's going on right now is just the fact that streaming royalties are so low for artists. And I think there needs to be some big change in streaming and how artists are compensated.
Mhm.
And it's just, yeah, it doesn't feel fair for smaller artists, and like especially like Spotify doing this thing where they won't pay you any royalties if your song hasn't made 1,000 plays. Where
Yeah,
it's like, what about like the
everybody else.
500 people or something that listen to it? Do they not matter? Like, are they not
Mhm.
important? Like, you're not going to pay us our pennies, but
But we still want our pennies.
I know, like those pennies add up. Like,
Yeah.
you'd be surprised. I think people, you know, obviously complain about streaming royalties. And when I think about how much the pennies have even added up for me as like a pretty small artist, I'm like, that's like helpful for paying like a bill. Like that's at least like 6 months of like a bill or something, that's
That's huge. That's huge.
yeah, it's super helpful. And but just thinking about how different things could be if streaming actually paid artists more, and that it's like the equivalent of like people aren't buying as many albums anymore.
No.
And I honestly think that's kind of cool because I mean, as much as I love physical media and, holding a record or holding a CD or holding a tape and playing that, um, we have so much waste in this world. And just thinking about like if we didn't have to keep manufacturing things that are just going to potentially end up in a landfill or
Hmm.
polluting the earth. And I'm like, well, it could be great then for things to be in this ethereal realm that people can still listen to it, but it just would need to pay artists as if people were buying the album or something, like it needs to just be at least at that equivalent of paying artists as if they were selling albums, but like on streaming, I think.
I feel like iTunes was the perfect like middle ground where you could still listen to it online, but you had to pay for the album and you had a physical version, but it was your version that you had on your phone or your laptop. And then
Yeah.
that was such a short-lived kind of existence, and streaming took out iTunes really fast. And so I feel like that would be a happy medium we can go back to, but maybe maybe there should be an option on streaming services. If you want to buy this album, you could also buy it, but that would kind of
Mm.
hurt their subscription rate. But I 100% agree, and I hope it does change. And part of all the music that we're getting is why I kind of started. It's because I wanted to be a place where people could kind of just like enjoy and talk about just like one artist or one album or one topic and not be inundated with so much new music. Because there's part of the issue is also there's just too much new music, let alone and therefore every individual artist isn't getting the attention they deserve. So
Mm.
that's partially why I try to reach out to artists that are, I'm like, how is more people not listening to Briana Marela? Because it's such good music. And there's a good
How do
amount.
you,
Yeah.
oh, sorry.
No, no, that was it.
How do you find music that you like, or like, how is that kind of process for you?
I I don't, well, yeah, I was gonna say I don't think it's different than other people, but it might be. So I I think the difference I might do versus other people is that I kind of sit with a project for a while. And I
Mm.
don't get excited for whatever's coming out that Friday. I'm like, no, I'm still listening to like albums from February and March because I'm not
Mm.
done with them. I'm still digesting them. And so like everything coming out right now, I'm like, I haven't even heard Charlie XCX, but I will be listening to it. Um, it's just too new for me right now. But I'm like, I love her music too. So that's the first thing I do. I scroll online. I have my publications, my stereo gums, my enemies, my pitchforks. Um, and then I pick a handful, I put them on my phone, and then I just sit with them. And
Oh,
I do that for a while. And then I
that's
recommend them, I
beautiful.
recommend, and then I try to do that again every couple of weeks. But it's a slow process, it's not as fun, and you're never like cool because you can't really talk about what's like really cool at the time. And that's the only hard part, is if people use music as something that's social, uh you wouldn't do that. You would kind of try to keep up, and that kind of keeps you at a surface level understanding of what a lot of the music we're getting sounds like. Um, but yeah,
Wow.
this came over time. I wasn't always like this, but it happened over time. Like for instance, when I first heard seen You Are a Wave, I was still in my old way of listening to things, and I wasn't digesting it enough. And I was like, oh man, this isn't what I want next.
Yeah.
Like the new version of me, I listen back and I'm just like, this is incredible. Like this is really, really cool. This is incredible. And then I read like how you were recording certain songs and like the synthesizers you were using and like wireless mics you would like whisper into. And I was like, take that into listening and then figure out like the intention of the song. And now I understand like the moods I get from these songs. And that's how I think how more people should be listening to music. It's a mood you're supposed to be getting. It's not I'm happy. And you could do that. I'm happy. I'm just gonna listen to happy music, but it's also what is the emotion that this artist is trying to give me? And are they successful in giving me that emotion? If the answer is yes, whether it's experimental, rock, country, hip hop, they did their job. So
Wow. That's so beautiful. I
yeah.
like that resonates so much with what you everything you just said. And I think sometimes I'm embarrassed to say that I'm still listening to music from like a year or like 2 years ago because it takes me so long to sit with something. And like you said, like I think some of my favorite kind of albums are ones that I listened to at first and was like, I don't know about this, and kind of brushed it off. But then there was something like lingering about it that I would come back to, and
Mhm.
like, and I just go deep and get obsessed. And like I'm still obsessed with the Lucretia Adult album I that came out, and I think that's already a year or two old. But it is hard when people are like, what are you listening to? I think my default is to be like, well, what have I like listened to in the last couple weeks that feels fresh and new, to be like, yeah, like I'm listening to this. But instead of being like, well, I'm actually listening to this album that's like maybe 2 years old because I still love it a lot and like I'm going deep into it. But yeah,
Mhm.
it's just hard because it doesn't feel like, I don't know, the social currency of it, of being
It,
like on top of what's coming out. There's
mhm.
a lot of pressure for that, but I do think you're right. I think things should shift and we should be able to be like, no, like music isn't meant to just be listened to and discarded. Like it's meant to
Mhm.
be, to really spend time with it and to go deep into the creator's mind and world, and how that influences your own world, and how that can, yeah, just like become a part of you. And it's so beautiful that we can take in all this music from so many amazing creators and like find our own place in it too.
Yeah, agreed. And I think that's what I'm excited about is I like independent artists like you and many others that are also not just leaving labels, but like never signing to labels, because then they're taking so much of that vision and they're creating their own little worlds, and they invite the people that love that music into their world. So one last complaint, and then I'll get to the last question, is when people say there's no music videos anymore. I'm like, there are a lot of people making music videos. You're just not like diving into them because they're not as exciting, and they're not, the media satisfaction isn't there. But the music video is crucial, especially to smaller artists, because it adds to the experience of listening to the music. And so if you really want to
Absolutely.
understand these projects, you have to watch these music videos. That's something I've been coming along to. I don't know if that resonates with you.
Totally. I love music videos. I wish, I mean, the hardest thing about when, if people are complaining about, yeah, watching music videos, just they're so expensive to make. Like even making like a small budget video, it just takes a lot of time, takes a lot of equipment, a lot of organizing, and especially for independent artists, like that's a hard thing to get together. Like having the funds to pay for a video and or yeah, just the time to make it happen.
All right. My final question is, what is the best advice you've been given related to music?
The best advice I've been given. Um, I guess this is maybe a funny piece of advice, and it's kind of coming secondhand, but it was when I was working with Alex on All Around Us when we were in Iceland, and for a long time, Alex's partner was Jonsi of Sigur Rós,
Mhm.
and they were together at the time, and when we were working on the album, there were times where I'd like make some really cool sound, or like there would be this strange thing that would happen, and I'd almost be ashamed of it. Like I'd be like, oh, like that felt like that was a weird sound, or like that kind of sounds like a mistake, and like let's make it quieter, or like we'd record something, but yeah, I was like, this is a really cool sound and I love it, but I like maybe it's too loud in the mix. And something that Alex had said to me that Yonsei would always tell him was that like, oh, you should take that sound and make it louder, or like be bold. Like don't be afraid to be bold. And I really have taken that to heart in terms of you have something and you're maybe feeling nervous about it, but it's like, don't make it quieter, make it louder. Like
Mhm.
really, really put it out there for people to see, because those like bold moments are like the things that are going to be memorable and that people are going to gravitate towards. And don't hide your, don't hide those little things that make you who you are.